Thanks for joining me. In this video, we're going to be talking about sampling. So sampling is the way a sample is chosen from the population. You have to be careful with your sampling because you could get some biased results. If some members of the population have a smaller likelihood of being included in the sample than other members of the population, and for other reasons. There's another video on some biases that could happen when you're collecting your data. So if you haven't watched that yet, you might be interested in doing so. The natural variation of samples is called sampling variability. This is unavoidable and expected in random sampling, but it's not really an issue if you have large enough samples. So if you chose a sample from a population and then you chose another sample from the same population, you're not going to get the same answers, and so your averages will be different. Your standard deviations will be different. The whole data set will be different because you sampled a different subset of the population. A random sample, now we're going to cover different ways to collect a sample. So the first way to collect a sample is a random sample. So this is one in which each member of the population has an equal probability of being chosen for the sample. A simple random sample is one in which every member of the population and any group of members has an equal probability of being chosen. So an example could be a math teacher puts each student's name on a ping pong ball and randomly draws a lucky winner to work a problem on the board at the front of the class. That would be a simple random sample. In stratified sampling, a population is divided into a number of subgroups. Random samples are then taken from each subgroup with sample sizes proportional to the size of the subgroup in the population. So if it's very important to you that you represent, let's say, sex, you have so many males and so many females. Maybe in your population, 70% of your population are female and 30% are male. Then you would want to make sure that you're choosing your sample with 70% of your sample being female and 30% being male so that it matches that breakdown. So an example, suppose a particular neighborhood, 30% of the residents were between the ages of 18 and 29, 40% of the residents were between the ages of 30 and 49, and the remaining 30% of the residents were 50 or older. If a random sample of 10 residents was being selected, and the surveyor wanted to make sure that they're using stratified sampling, then he should make sure that he picks 3 residents from the first age group, 4 from the second age group, and 3 from the last age group. So stratified is breaking it down into subgroups and then choosing a proportional amount from each group. Cluster sampling, this is when the population is divided up into subgroups and a set of subgroups are selected to be in the sample. So this is different than the stratified in that there already are groups, as in a school is divided into classes. So you have a random selection of students in each class. So you might want to just pick out 10 classes at random and have those students participate in the survey. It's not dividing it up based on a category. In systematic sampling, every nth member of the population is selected to be in the sample. So this would be an example of the teacher takes her roster and she goes down the roster and every third name is a person that she calls on. Convenient sampling and voluntary response sampling are the two types of sampling that are not very good. You're not going to get as good of a sample with these two methods. And when I say not as good of a sample, I mean one that's representative of your population. So convenient sampling is a technique in which a sample is just chosen by whoever is convenient. A pollster goes to the mall and interviews the first 20 people who agree to speak to him. Well, let's say this pollster is standing outside of Nordstrom, and you think about who he's going to be asking. Well, someone who can walk into Nordstrom may not especially let's say it's the middle of the day. It's a Wednesday at 2 o'clock in the afternoon and he's standing outside of Nordstrom. Well, a lot of people have to work, so they're not going to be included in the poll. Anyone who's going in Nordstrom on Wednesday at 2 o'clock may not be representative of the population as a whole. A voluntary response sampling is allowing the sample to volunteer. This is generally not a good sampling method because oftentimes the volunteers who take the time to fill out the surveys or participate have a really strong opinion of the subject of survey. So a restaurant asks customers to fill out a survey on the kiosk at the end of their meal. They're probably only going to get responses from the people who had a really great experience where the server went above and beyond or their food was exceptional, or they're going to get responses from the customer who had cold food, the server was rude, had a terrible experience. And so you're going to get these extreme values for your survey rather than probably the average or common responses. So let's look at these sampling techniques and see if we can pick out which method was used in each case. Number 1, every 100th person entering an arena was selected. So this is an example of systematic. Number 2, a sample was selected to contain 25 men and 35 women. So this would be stratified. They're selecting a certain number of each sex in order to mimic the population. Number 3, viewers of a new show are asked to vote on the show's website. So this would be voluntary. So voluntary response. They're just putting out some kind of a questionnaire and the people who want to respond can. Number 4, a website randomly selects 50 of their customers to send a satisfaction survey. So this is simple random. So it's random, it's just 50 customers they're picking to complete a survey. Number 5, to survey voters in a town, a polling company randomly selects 10 city blocks and interviews everyone who lives on those blocks. So this is where they're already there. They've already situated themselves on these blocks. The surveyor isn't separating them into blocks. And then they're picking everyone from those blocks. That's cluster. These examples were taken from the college mathematics textbook from Scottsdale Community College, which is an open and free resource online.